Hey everybody, welcome back. So I want to quickly go over basically the turning point of the Civil War. Now the turning point of the Civil War is it's pretty dramatic because it doesn't happen the way most people thought it would. It happens rather quickly. So let's quickly take a look at the conditions of the men, and then we'll go into the biggest turning point in the war. So the conditions for most soldiers was pretty miserable throughout the war. And here I have a little picture of most soldiers. You can look, it's actually pretty cool. They made a little, what's called a corduroy road. You know, like the corduroy pants that have the little ridges? Where it was muddy, they would make these corduroy roads, which were pieces of wood split in half and laid down so you could walk without getting your feet muddy. The average soldier in the Civil War actually had a pretty tough time. Most guys, when it came to what they were eating, three main foods made up their daily rations. They were bacon, beans, and hardtack. So bacon, obviously you know what bacon is, but it was heavily salted like it is today, so it would last without refrigeration. Beans were dry, so you had to soak them overnight, and then you would have to boil them for a very long time. And the other was hardtack. Hardtack is basically water, salt, flour mixed up and baked into a super hard little cracker. So you'd have to probably soak it in the beans or throw it into the fat with the bacon, or you'd have to dip it in. The other thing that were given was coffee. So you would have to basically throw it into the coffee and let it get soft before you could eat it. Also, during a long march, guys would put it in their cheek and let it get soft inside their mouth. The other thing guys were dealing with was disease. So dysentery is basically diarrhea. It's a infection in your gut. Um, the other thing is they would get lice a lot. Lice were a real problem in people's hair. It was hard to get rid of them. And an interesting thing about the Civil War is more men died of disease than in battle. So disease was actually the real enemy. Guys got sick very easily. Think about it today. When you guys get sick, you go to the doctor, you get an antibiotic, and you feel better. There were no antibiotics, so if you got sick out in the field, let alone an injury, your chances of dying of an infection were really pretty good. Another thing is, Civil War medicine was not great, as we know. Hospitals were dirty, infections were really common. They didn't realize that if you did a surgery on a person with an infection, and then you went to the next person to do a surgery, that you could actually spread that infection. So they didn't wash the instruments in between surgeries. You know, it's kind of interesting. We think of soap today. You know, we're going through a pandemic, and they keep saying the best thing you can do is wash your hands. They didn't know that soap actually killed infection at the time. It's kind of hard to imagine, but even doctors didn't realize that infection could be spread by not washing your hands. The other thing is, if you were injured, if you were hit by a bullet in your bone, the most obvious solution was amputation. There was no surgery, reconstructing a bone, reconstructing tissue. So if you got hit in the bone with a mini ball, one of those bullets we looked at earlier, you simply had to either amputate the arm, the leg, or you died. And most people were actually killed by the surgery because they were given an infection. They got bacteria in the wound. So if you were lucky, now think about this, if you were lucky, they would cut your arm off. Now you're not asleep for this, you're wide awake. They'd give you some whiskey. Hopefully that would take the edge off. Have you ever heard the expression, you just have to bite the bullet and you just have to go through with it even though you know it's going to be miserable? They would literally put one of those bullets in between their teeth and you could bite down on it. It was soft lead. So you could bite down and kind of get rid of some of that pain. You were wide awake, and if you were really lucky, they had hot tar on the end. So when they cut off part of your arm, they could dip your stump into that hot tar to kill the infection. Uh, Surgery was horrendous and really painful. The other thing was if you were captured by the enemy, Civil War prisons were really bad on both sides. Both sides were struggling to get food to their soldiers, so they weren't all that likely to give you food if you were on the opposite side, especially in the South as the war went on and they had less and less food. They weren't going to give it to Union soldiers. 15% of Union soldiers in Southern prisons died. 12% of Confederate prisoners in Northern prisons died. The worst one by far was in South Carolina. It was called Andersonville. And Union soldiers were held there and were basically starved to death. The only executions after the war done by the North were the commanders of Andersonville prison. The commanders of Andersonville prison were hanged. No one else was hanged. So if you get a chance, you can pause the video and go look at these pictures. This PowerPoint is in the post from yesterday. I'll pause for a couple seconds. I'll brush my hair and my beard while I'm waiting. There we go. Get some fresh beard look here. I said I wasn't going to shave the beard until we got back to school, but now I don't know if I can wait all summer to shave. It's getting pretty long. All right, so let's take a look at the fourth section of this chapter. The North takes charge. So here's the main idea. Vicksburg, the victories of the Union at Vicksburg and Gettysburg helped the Union basically win the war. If it weren't for these two battles, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and another one is Chancellorsville, the South would not have won the war. Robert E. Lee won his biggest victory, and that is wrong. 100% wrong. He lost Gettysburg. That's supposed to say Chancellorsville. Yeah, I know you guys think I'm a genius, but look, even the great Costanzo can make a mistake. So the biggest victory of the war by far was Chancellorsville for Robert E. Lee. He crushed Joseph Hooker. Now Hooker, it sounds like something else. He was obsessed with women following him around in camp. And a lot of people said that's where the term hooker actually came from. Not true, but it says a lot that people thought that. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, Robert E. Lee crushed the Union Army. Crushed it. If you go to West Point, the military academy today, you're going to study Chancellorsville. Stonewall Jackson, who was his second in command, and one of my favorites from American history, was actually killed in this battle. He was riding back to his own line at dusk, so right before the sun went down, and his own men accidentally shot him. He was shot in the arm. They amputated his arm, and it looked like he was going to be okay, and he ended up getting pneumonia and dying. It was so bad that Robert E. Lee, there's a great quote, Robert E. Lee said, "Stonewall Jackson has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right," meaning I lost the most important person in my army. After this huge victory, Lee says, you know what, I'm going to take this war to the North. I'm going to make them defend their own territory instead of me always fighting in Virginia. So he moves north to Pennsylvania, and he goes into Gettysburg, which is actually a small town at the time with a college. It turns out to be the most important battle of the war. It is a 3-day battle. Robert E. Lee does really well the first 2 days. Looks like he's winning. Day 3 was a disaster. And to find out why it's a disaster, please watch this video, The Civil War in 4 Minutes, Battle of Gettysburg. So I'll pause for a second. I'll brush my beard again. Gotta look fresh. Gotta look fly. I'm Nick Costanzo, the history guy. Look at that. I'm even rhyming now. I need a TikTok. You hear that, Sawajid? Alright. So day 3 is a disaster. Here's the simple truth. After Gettysburg, the Confederacy will never again recover. They're pretty much decimated by the Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg is one of the reasons why the Confederacy loses the war. And the other reason is, we'll get there in a second. Let's take a look at the Gettysburg Address. So one of the most famous speeches ever given in American history is the Gettysburg Address. I'm sure you guys have heard it. Let's read through it quickly. 4 score, a score is 20 years. So 80 years, right? 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Let's take a look at this. If we look at this, these are the founding principles of the country, right? We are a nation conceived, meaning created in liberty, and we are dedicated to the proposition or the argument that all men are equal. Okay, so that's the founding principle. Let's read the second section. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived, meaning or so thought of, and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. So he's saying, look, we're now in a civil war, and we're actually on this field where all these men died, and we need to decide whether or not this country can actually survive. Basically what he's saying is, can this experiment last? Can the United States last? Let's read the last section. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow or make holy this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here. That's kind of interesting, right? Here we are studying it in the year 2020, and he's saying in 1863, no one will remember what we say here. So let's go back to here. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish for the earth. What is the main point Lincoln is saying here? It is the war must be won because of their sacrifice. Now, I just want you guys to notice the dope animations I added in here. What Lincoln is saying is, look, these guys died. We can't just ignore that. If the Union doesn't win the war, these people all died in vain. So Lincoln is going to say, basically, he has to lead this nation to victory so that the nation, and here's the real money quote in this, that they shall have a new birth of freedom, basically meaning slavery. That the United States, which promises that all men are created equal, needs to actually live up to that all people will be treated as equal. So Lincoln is now completely devoted to abolition. All right? So the last thing we're going to look at today is the Battle of Vicksburg. Vicksburg sits right on the Mississippi. If the Union can take Vicksburg, they will cut off the western part of the Confederacy from the northern part. They will take the Mississippi River. Think back to that Anaconda plan we talked about at the beginning of the war, where the Union will crush the Confederacy slowly and basically choke the life out of them. Grant lays siege to Vicksburg, the city, for 2 months. He sets up camp outside. He pummels it and bombards it with cannons for 2 months. He basically starves the people out of the city. And the people of the city finally surrender. Now, the final day of Vicksburg actually happens on the same day as Gettysburg. So many people will call them the twin victories of Gettysburg and Vicksburg. And I almost said Gettysburg. Gettysburg and Vicksburg. These twin victories doom the Confederacy. And here is Vicksburg. You can see Vicksburg sits right on the river, so any ship that has to come past has to basically come down the river this way and then come right past Vicksburg. And the Union set up huge cannons here and blasted Confederate ships. And you can see they go down and they actually came at Vicksburg from the east. So Vicksburg really dooms the Confederacy. You can pause this and look at this for 1 second. You can see they took out the railway lines so that the Confederates couldn't move anything. All right, we will look at the very end of the war tomorrow. I hope you guys are doing well. Please let me know if I can do anything for you. I'd be happy to do anything for you that I can. Let me know if you're having any problems or need any extra help. All right, Have a good day, guys. Talk to you soon.